make this comment at this time every year that I think the Super Bowl is the most important religious holiday in America. And Carol asked me if I was going to talk about football today, and I'm not. So before I get started, I wanted to mention that on Sunday, February 24th, at the Vista Buddhist Temple, I'm going to be teaching a class, the one on the far right, Buddha Nature and the Nirvana Sutra. The subtitle or tagline is The Positive Side of Buddhism. So there's a professor at Berkeley named Mark Blum, and he's spoken at the Jodo Shinshu Center a lot, and I don't think he's spoken at OCBC yet, but he translated the first volume of the Nirvana Sutra, and it's like, I don't know, 400 or 500 pages, and there's 4 volumes, right? And it took him like 10 years to translate the first volume. And it supposedly, the Nirvana Sutra is the sutra that Shinran, our founder, uses and references and quotes a lot. So a lot of Buddhist traditions rely on the Lotus Sutra, but Shinran and the Pure Land tradition relies on the Nirvana Sutra. And this is one of the last sutras historically that the Buddha gave before, as he was nearing death. And it's also the first time that Buddha nature is mentioned explicitly. So it's a very positive message. And when you read this text, you have to read it for the way it makes you feel. It's like listening to music. You really have to fight the urge to read it for doctrinal messages or an academic or intellectual understanding. I read it for the way it made me feel. So that's what the course is. It's kind of my book report or my commentary on this first volume. And it will be $5 for temple members, $5 for students, and $15 for the general public. And it's from 1 to 4 o'clock. So it's 3 hours with several breaks. And the course is going to be the live version of this online course that's on our everydaybuddhist.org site. So if you go to everydaybuddhist.org and you press that button, this is the course. It's $39 online, so you're getting like a huge break. If you think about it, you get me in person, right? Probably like $15 or $5. This is online and I used to have it at 40, but one of the people on my committee said that 39 sounds way cheaper than 40. And I've always thought that was silly, but I changed it. And the reason why it's $40, it's 8 45-minute lectures with lots of additional readings. I have a link to the first volume of the Nirvana Sutra. You could read it for free online. There's video, complimentary video. There's a video of Mark Blum explaining how he translated the text. Sometimes Shinran has been criticized a little bit by scholars because he's very loose with his translation of this Chinese text. And what Dr. Blum says is that the Chinese from this period, the grammar is very loose. It's hard to tell what's a verb, what's a noun, and what's an adjective. And there's no punctuation marks. So it's even hard to tell where the sentence begins and ends. And a lot of what Shinran did is he translated it in the way it made him feel. So sometimes he was unorthodox, but the text was written in a very loose and open style. And I always said it's like listening to the Beatles or reading poetry. It's meant to be interpreted by the reader. It's language on the edge of meaning. So I don't really think Shinran was being overly unorthodox. This was a common practice in Japanese Buddhism to kind of pull out the spiritual meaning behind the words. So if you ever want to go there, everydaybuddhist.org. And I always tell people they're sponsoring my Dharma talk. So this is a short commercial before I begin. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, I had this ongoing saga about remotes. I don't know if you remember that, but I have a new Mac, and my old, expensive, really nice remote didn't work anymore, and I thought there was like a vortex, not a polar vortex, but I thought there was some kind of Wi-Fi vortex in here. So I went and bought another brand new remote for another $75, and it didn't really work either. And so last time I was here, I told you I took my PowerPoint and I saved it in Keynote, which is a Mac Apple version of PowerPoint, and then I could use my phone as my remote. But I didn't like that either. So Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto, I think he came here to speak. I don't know if you noticed, but his remote worked. I noticed it. First thing I noticed, it wasn't the Buddhism, it was the remote. I'm like, so I went up to him and he showed me his remote, and it's really weird. There's like no brand on it. I took pictures of it, and I went on Amazon and I found it. It's only $10. It's $10 and it works perfectly. So anyway, I'm really happy now. Remember I told you I can never let technology beat me. So I wanted to give this Dharma talk about the 4 poisons and the 4 antidotes. And so in Buddhism, there's kind of a negative side and a positive side. So sometimes I think Buddhism maybe emphasizes the negative side too much. And this is the side of the person that's lost and is unaware they have a problem and is in kind of a dark cloud over their head. They're frustrated, they're struggling, they're trying as hard as they can, but they don't seem to be as happy as they think they should be. So that person who's unaware of the dire straits they're in is kind of the 4 poison side. And sometimes that gets emphasized a lot, and sometimes it sounds a bit harsh and negative, like foolish beings, deluded, ignorant. And then sometimes we don't emphasize the part that when you first come into the temple, or you first buy your first book on Buddhism, or if you even go to your first yoga class, you've turned your life around and you're now on your way. And things are no longer dark and dreary. You really have a real chance of hope in your life. You finally found the antidote. You finally found the medicine. And when that happens, a whole new vista opens up to you. So that Buddha nature class I'm going to teach is all about enlightenment and awakening and the positive potential of all human beings, as opposed to the state where we normally find ourselves. So I'm going to start negative, and then I'm going to go positive. So traditionally, there is what is called the 3 poisons. This is a very famous thing in Buddhism. I've told you there's lots and lots of lists in Buddhism. And they say, it's kind of neat because I don't know if the Buddha knew, was he prescient? Did he know we were going to have PowerPoint slides someday? And that it's really great to have our religion's based on bullet points. There's like the 3 this and the 4 that. And I told you could go on the internet and look up Buddhism by the numbers. And I printed it out once. It's like 30 or 40 pages. Everything that comes in 2s, everything that comes in 3s. It's hilarious. Everything that comes in 4s, 5s, 6s, 8s. It just goes on forever. But a lot of scholars think that the Buddha didn't really talk like that. There was no PowerPoint 2,500 years ago. They think that what the monks did is they took his narrative, poetic Dharma talk, and then they kind of boiled it down into bullet points, making it easier to memorize and to chant. So they gave it a structure and a format, and then supposedly all these lists are linked together. So, and there's, the Indians were amazing at memorization. I don't know if this is as a culture, they could memorize vast amounts of material, but they did it with they had help. They had mnemonics, they had lists, and the lists were linked. So one simple example is the 4 Noble Truths. Remember I said the 4th Noble Truth is the Eightfold Path. So it all starts linking together. And the other thing, I was reading a book on mantras, chanting mantras, or they may even do this in Taiko, it's possible. They actually have formulas. Like algebraic formulas where they'll say, we chant this 3 times, and then we chant this once, and then we square it, and we do that twice. And then that's cubed. So they actually have these formulas they know. So it's not like they've memorized an hour's worth of chanting, they've memorized like 5 components within this algebraic equation. So I thought that was really cool. So, and I don't know if I told you this before either, but my son Teague is now a PA, a physician's assistant. And I told him about the 3 poisons, and he said that this is not accurate. As a Buddhist and as a healthcare professional, he said that a poison is something you take from the outside. So cyanide, arsenic. And he told me venom, it's not venom. Venom, he said, is when you're bitten by an insect or a reptile or an animal, some kind of animal. So you can't say you were bitten by a poisonous snake. All right. I thought that was amazing, because I always say that. I've never bitten by a poisonous snake, but I would say that. He said it's a venomous snake. So a lot of Buddhist ministers use the word toxins. That word, not poisons, not venom, but toxins. It's something that we produce internally. So, you know, these emotions we have and these negative things we do, it's not because of the outside world. It's not like we were bit by a mean person, or, you know, it was ingested by interacting with unhappy people out there that made me unhappy. It's something that's generated within. And then the other thing we do is we associate these 3 toxins with animals, and it's confusing because we have different animal similes in America than they have in India. So I printed this out. One of them I think is wrong, but I want to show you how good you are at American animal similes. Blind as a, wise as a, and I think this one's wrong. It says hungry as a wolf. That's not a wolf. It's a horse, right?
Bear.
Sly as a,
Fox.
quiet as a, slippery as a, proud as a,
Peacock.
yes. Okay, that's enough. So, the first poison, and this is kind of at the hub of the wheel. This is what causes all of our problems. So it's kind of nice in Buddhism. It's not like we have tons of problems, right? Like we may feel like in life there's a lot of things going wrong and there's a lot of problems, but the Buddha said there's really only like 1 or 2 things that are causing all your problems. So one of them is greed. And the animal, so what they do is they use 3 animals for the 3 poisons. And for greed, I thought, well, one of the animals is a pig. So I thought the pig represented greed, because I always think of pigs as being kind of greedy. They always want to eat. But it's actually this bird, and I thought it was a chicken. In the American books, it always looks like a rooster. And I always thought, well, why is a rooster greedy? I thought the rooster would be angry or ignorant, but I couldn't understand what is so greedy about chickens. And it turns out that it's a bird in India that has talons. So it has to be like a hawk or an owl or an eagle, because they're always grasping. So a bird that grasps its prey is the animal simile they use for greed. So it couldn't be a sparrow, right? So the next one is anger. So you can imagine we want more of what we don't have that we really enjoy, and we want less of what we do have that we don't like. And when we're in that state of not being happy with things as they are, we tend to get frustrated and angry. So for anger, I got this one right, because this simile matches. It's a rattlesnake, a snake. So, you know, a snake is very aggressive and can be quite angry. And maybe in India it was a cobra. And then for ignorance, the reason why we are angry and frustrated is because we're trying to hold on to things that are impermanent. Like I got really frustrated when I lost my hair. That was really frustrating for me. But I was ignorant because my dad had really great hair. But I didn't realize I should have looked at my mom's father. So I thought, when I grow up, I'm going to be really handsome because my dad has such great hair. But that has nothing to do with it. So it's very frustrating when your dad has good hair and you don't. So I was ignorant. I was trying to hang on to something that I have no control over. And I got very frustrated. And so I added this fourth one. It's not really supposed to be there, but I like symmetry and it goes with my talk. So these three toxins is what causes our suffering. So the Buddha said it's not all the details in your life. It's not the economy, it's not your hair. It's none of those things. These are the three things that causes us to suffer. So if we could see things more clearly, we would be a lot less greedy and we would not be so angry and frustrated. So I think in Western culture, there's a real sense religiously that we should try to remove these things from our lives. That these are negative things that we really need to remove. And I grew up as a Protestant, so a lot of the rules in the Ten Commandments and a lot of the rules I learned in church were bad things I should stop doing. So if you're greedy, you shouldn't do that, right? And you shouldn't be angry. Angry is bad. Stop being angry. But it's very hard to just decide, I'm not going to be angry today. And like with me, I get very frustrated because I couldn't not be angry, and then I would get kind of angry about that. So it's very difficult. So greed, anger, and ignorance leads to all of our suffering. So from a Buddhist point of view, there's a very small number of things we need to focus on to really have a big impact on our lives. So there's kind of two approaches. The first approach is to remove the negatives from your life. The second approach is to add something positive to your life. So, for example, if you have an infection, you can either remove the infected area, you can lance it or drain it, or you can take antibiotics. And we call this the antidote approach, right? You take something very positive. So you don't really attack the infection directly. So there is something in Buddhism called the 4 antidotes. And that's why I had to have 4 in my previous slide. I'm kind of obsessed on symmetry. Remember I told you if the numbers line up, it's true? Right? So the antidote for greed is sympathetic joy. So rather than be greedy that somebody gets more than you, you begin to learn to take pleasure and happiness in others' achievements, right? So if somebody does well, rather than saying, gosh, I wish that was me, you begin to appreciate what they've done and you take joy in it and satisfaction in it. And maybe they achieve some of that because of your support and help. So their successes become your successes. For anger, there is a practice called loving kindness. This is the translation of that word metta, the metta meditation that's in the service book. And this is the name that Ron Artest took. Well, I guess I'm going to talk about sports today. Ron Artest, he played for the Indiana Pacers, and he got in a big fight, and he went into the stands, and they punched some fans. And that's really not good. The commissioner said, this is bad. We don't want the NBA players going into the stands and fighting with fans. So he had like a huge suspension, a huge fine. He came to the Lakers as Ron Artest, and he left as Metta World Peace. So he legally changed his name to Metta World Peace after I guess that's stating his aspiration to really change who he was. It's a crazy name, but I mean, they would announce the game and they would say, oh, a slam dunk by Metta World Peace. It was just like, I thought, is that 3 people or 1 person? And then for ignorance, through insight, one sees clearly and one begins to have compassion. And then for suffering, the idea is you reach a state of equanimity, of balance. You're not being bounced around by every little thing. You're grounded, you're centered. You handle things with ease. I mean, bad things happen, but you don't let it completely change your day. You just deal with it. So, these are the 4 toxins on the left and the 4 antidotes on the right. And you could either focus on removing these, or we could focus on building up what's on the right. And you know, the golden chain today sounds a lot like this on the right. You know, being kind and gentle to all living things, having pure and beautiful thoughts, pure and beautiful words, pure and beautiful deeds. So I wanted to go over these real quick. Sympathetic joy is taking sympathetic or altruistic joy in the happiness of others. People also identify sympathetic joy with empathy. The cultivation of sympathetic joy is an antidote to envy and jealousy. Loving kindness. The importance of loving kindness in Buddhism, so this is a big deal when they say this. This is a big deal. Cannot be overstated. So I exaggerate a lot in my life. I told you one time I told my boss I exaggerate 10,000 times a day. And he goes, "Isn't that an exaggeration?" So the importance of loving kindness in Buddhism cannot be overstated. Loving kindness is benevolence toward all beings without discrimination or selfish attachment. An antidote for anger. Compassion is active sympathy extended to all sentient beings. Ideally, compassion is wisdom in action, which leads to the realization that all sentient beings exist in relationship to one another and derive their identity from each other. Equanimity. Equanimity is a mind in balance, free of discrimination and rooted in insight. So these rules about insight, wisdom, this is the opposite of ignorance. This balance is not indifference. So this is one thing that Americans do. They think if you're not discriminating and you're balanced, that somehow you're indifferent or apathetic. And the famous folklorist Joseph Campbell said, that's a conclusion, but it's not a necessary conclusion. So not being attached doesn't mean being detached, right? It's a healthy middle. But this balance is not indifference, but active mindfulness, because it is rooted in insight of no self. It is not unbalanced by the passions of attraction and aversion. Practice. So this is where you actually have to do the work. I mean, it's nice to want to be like this, but how do you make it happen? It is important to understand that these mental states are not emotions, nor is it possible to simply make up your mind you are going to be loving, compassionate, empathetic, and balanced from now on. Truly dwelling in these 4 states requires changing how you experience and perceive yourself and others. So this is why we come to church. This is why we listen to the teachings. This is why we say Namo Amida Butsu. This is why we bow and offer incense, is to try to develop these qualities that become a natural byproduct of our practice. So when I first came to the Buddhist temple, I was kind of wondering why we didn't talk about you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't steal. But we're taking a different approach. We're trying to develop characteristics in which positive behavior becomes natural. And so there's kind of 2 ways to come at it. And from a Buddhist tradition, most of the practice is to develop a different mindset, a different orientation from the one you have. Kind of change the basis or the foundation of the way you live your life. And in mathematics, there's actually a thing called a change of basis. And they actually use that phrase in Buddhism. This basis is swapped out for another one. And that basically changes all the other aspects of your life in kind of one fell swoop. So I made it to 10:15. I have to stop talking now. Thank you very much. See how balanced I am? Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.